News Radio 700 WLW.
A lot of what you get in life is anecdotal. Some of it is personal experience, and some of it is data-driven. This is data-driven. That 73% of us, you, me, 73% of us, almost three-quarters of us, are getting into the holiday cheer with willingness to return to normal activity. 73% of us. 7% better than what it was even 3 weeks ago. How do I know this? Well, it's a new study that's out, done by Lisa Miller and Associates. They're a major research firm. And it's all about consumer re-entry into the marketplace during the Christmas season. The headline on the research is kind of cute. It says, will the Omicron Grinch steal Christmas? Or perhaps the Omicron Grinch steal Christmas? But initial concerns for Omicron among people that were surveyed and among people that said that they were re-entering the great platform of life. Only 41% were very concerned about Omicron, compared to 56% back in August that were concerned about the Delta variant. And it then cascades down into various things that people do during the holiday season, going to parties, traveling, shopping, in-person shopping, just meeting and greeting other people. It would seem from this particular set of numbers that even with some of the scare tactics that are coming out of Washington about this new variant, which, you know, it's all the data about it right now is that it is, yes, it's more transmissible, but it is not as deadly as the Delta variant. Despite all of what you're hearing, and maybe you shouldn't let people in your house who haven't been vaccinated and all of that, you want to buy into that, go right ahead. Despite hearing all of that, it seems like three-quarters of us are saying, you know what, I'm getting on with life. Now, as I mentioned, it was a survey done by a company called Lisa Miller and Associates. And what do you know? We don't have the associates. We have Lisa Miller, who has been on my program many times and just has a good feel for what's the story behind the numbers. And she joins us here now on this Christmas Eve, 2021. Lisa, Merry Christmas, and thank you for joining us. How are you on this day?
I am doing great. Thanks for having me back, Ken.
Well, it's great to hear your voice again. Now, you did an extensive survey. All of your surveys are that way, too. But will the Omicron Grinch steal Christmas? And you came up with some interesting things here about where we were before this variant reared its ugly head and what people are saying now that it seems to be in everybody's vocabulary. Before this variant, I think people were back on the balls of their feet. Are they still, in your opinion?
Well, what's interesting is we did a survey last weekend, and we were, from a consumer sentiment standpoint, it was the highest positive consumer sentiment that we've seen since the beginning of the COVID started last year. And 73% of Americans were like, yeah, I'm ready to get back out. I'm excited getting back to my normal activities, maybe a little bit slower, but 73%. Yeah. So that was very encouraging. But that kind of the Grinch, the cloud that's kind of looming over is 41%. You know, we're very, extremely very concerned about Omicron. So there's a little bit of that cloud. The positive news, though, is compared to Delta, in the fall, the concern is much, much lower about Omicron, at least now. We'll see how it goes in the coming days and weeks. But for now, it's a lot less than when people were concerned about Delta in the fall. I sense, and again, all of my stuff that I have is anecdotal. I mean, you do the research. I just sense that right now, given the fact that Omicron hasn't killed anybody yet in the world, that people just want to plow through it. They're not going to be held back, and this is Christmas, and I gave you last Christmas, but I'm not giving you this Christmas. I sense that's the sentiment out there, don't you? Well, basically as of last weekend, right? So last weekend, it's definitely different than Delta. And you are right. The concern is significantly lower for Omicron. And I think it'll be interesting to see. And in fact, I have a survey that's in the field right now because I definitely wanted to see how this week was different than last week. Yeah. But as of now, it does. And I live in Dallas, and, it's definitely today people are out and about. So I think people are maybe trying to plow through.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I think it does depend where you live. I think if you're in places like New York and California where there has been more of a heavy-handed approach to this, you might feel differently than in other areas of the country, like the Southwest, Midwest, and certainly in the southeastern part of the country. I do think there's some regional behavior here, right?
Without a doubt, and we've seen that all along. And I definitely look at the regionality of the consumer sentiment. And you are absolutely right. Depending on where you live, your view of the whole pandemic is actually very different. But what was interesting is last month, the Northeast and the West were actually, the positive sentiment was very, very strong. And so it will be very interesting to see in this wave this weekend to see how that changed, because obviously in New York, we know that the cases are very high right now. And again, we're not seeing, at least as of now, hospitalizations rising quite yet. But they are, they're slowly getting there. So it will, is it here we go again, or are we going to be pushing through? And hopefully, as you know, I'm looking for the joy in every day. So I'm hoping that, we can see that joy.
Yeah, again, looking at your data, and this is before Omicron, but I mean, you 27% shopped in person for the first time, 26% dined at a restaurant. The one that I think that was intriguing to me is 5% flew on a plane. I mean, I've been on planes all through the pandemic last year, all through this year too. The airports are jammed and the planes are packed. 5% kind of struck me as a little low.
Well, and keep in mind, the way that question was asked was that, how many people just finally did it for the first time recently? So it basically kind of almost makes your point, right? It is low because people had already been out there. But I think that really kind of accounts for some of the Thanksgiving travel that people finally did venture out. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the country is back on its feet. We'll see exactly just how steady those feet are here in the next coming weeks. But I did see this as well. 78% of small business owners say holiday sales, what we're in the middle of right now and coming toward the end now. But that will determine whether they remain open in 2022. That's a large number. That's 8 in 10 businesses are answering that question that way. To me, that's kind of scary, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's where I think, as consumers, when it comes to the local stores and even some of the mid-sized stores, the holiday season, typically 40% of retail sales are done during the holiday season. So you can imagine that those retail shops out there are really, really counting on the consumers in the holidays this season. So I think that there's a lot banking on the next couple of weeks, unfortunately.
I don't, again, I don't know what your research shows, but I would think one of the things that a small business would have in its fight against the big box stores is to actually have product there. In other words, walk in, there's the product, I can buy it, I can leave, as opposed to walk in, oh, we don't have that, go to our website. I think small business owners can really get through this if they have product on shelf that people want.
Well, that is absolutely true. And I think what's interesting is I think that's a mixed bag, kind of just like everything else right now with COVID. I think some of the smaller shops are struggling with inventory as well. But those, I think in any case, the local businesses, having those local connections, buying local, I think there's just that community aspect that actually is very favorable for small businesses. And even we've seen in the restaurant business, there's a commercial that, Domino's is running right now that they actually bought gift cards for small independents. Yeah. So they're giving out gift cards for competitors, which is really fascinating.
Yeah. Lisa Miller's our guest. She has her own research company, Lisa Miller and Associates, and Gearing Up for the Consumer, Reentry and the Journey Back to Joy is where you can find a lot of what we're talking about right here. The other thing I think that I think consumers are trying to get a handle on, like the rest of the world, is inflation. And businesses have got to be very careful right now, I think. You can't overcharge for something to a point where your customer is going to walk out the door and never come back. More of a problem for a smaller business than for a big box company, right?
Well, inflation, we've been seeing that concern, over the last 3 months. In fact, concern about pricing and And really, that will be another kind of Grinch, honestly, in the holiday season, because, people have a budget for their gifts, and that might not go as far. And the other thing is, we've said from the beginning, lead with joy, reassure with safety. But what's interesting is that if something's out of stock or prices are really high, that's not very joyful.
Yeah.
And so that makes consumers maybe want to shop someplace else or go to another restaurant. So consumers, they have choices today. So I think operators need to deliver joy and the joyful experiences.
LWM-associates.com is where you can find Lisa, where she just has great information. Stay well. Have a great Christmas, and we'll talk real soon, I promise. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.